Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm 18. Tell me, does your boyfriend have habits that piss you off? Watch my story till the end and find out how I got involved with a guy who constantly makes nasty noises. I always had troubles with guys at school. Actually, I've just never had a boyfriend because I had other things to do than chase guys, like going to college. What guys? But I got involved in a stupid bet. My besties made a bet that each of us would come to the next party with a guy, and I agreed just to keep up. It seemed like there was a lot of time before the party, and then there was only a week left. And as before, I had no boyfriend. I took a train to my hometown and felt disheartened. We put money on the bet. The amount wasn't big, but I still didn't want to lose. Okay, what if we imagine for a moment that I backed out of the bet? It was so embarrassing. Was I really so pathetic that I couldn't even find some loser to go on a single date? As luck would have it, a handsome, fit guy with a brilliant smile sat in front of me. He was eating chips, and I was too embarrassed to look at him. Then, it dawned on me. I have a cousin the same age as me, a relative distant enough that I definitely hadn't mentioned him in front of my friends. What if he could help me? I wrote him a message saying, "Meet me at our place. Hurry up, there is money involved." I mentioned that to be sure that he'd answer. And suddenly, I heard a disgusting sound. It turned out that the guy in front of me finished his chips and suddenly burped. I tried to pretend that I didn't notice that, but he continued to make burp noises, and then he gazed at me. Have you ever received attention from someone totally disgusting? The guy walked over to me. I smiled tightly, moved away, and pretended to have a keen interest in the landscape outside the window, and hoped that he would get the hint. I received the SMS at the same time as the guy burped again. I opened it and groaned out loud. My cousin was out of town for the whole weekend. The vile sounds that the guy was making suddenly began to not seem so vile. I looked at him appraisingly. He smiled in response, clearly deciding that I was flirting. But what should I have done? It was a desperate situation. I started making eyes at him. He was the first to start the conversation by asking, "Where are you going?" That's how we got acquainted. His name was Matt, and apparently being too happy made his disgusting sounds even louder. At the nearest station, I went out to get some air and call Ellie, but Matt followed me. At first, we were even flirting, but Matt could not contain his urge and burped when the guard was passing by. The guard turned around with such a stupid face that I burst out laughing and couldn't stop. Then Matt burped again. The guard asked to me. I thought we'd better stop, but as luck would have it, I just laughed harder. The guard frowned and walked towards us. Then Matt screamed, "Let's run!" And we ran away. What a nonsense! I should have said immediately that I wasn't with this idiot and calmly leave. And while we were hiding, the train had already gone. What was I supposed to do then? Matt asked why I was so worried, and I told him the whole truth about the party, the stupid bet, and that I was ready to invite him with me, but we wouldn't get anywhere now. Having said that, I got pretty embarrassed because I really liked Matt when he wasn't burping. Well, Matt replied that in that case, getting to the party was a matter of honor, and we would go there by bus, and that he would pay for the tickets. We found a bus station, and quickly things began to get better, which meant that I had the opportunity to think about what would come next. I colorfully imagined how I would appear at the party with Matt. It turned out beautiful and exciting. Then, it was embarrassing and unpleasant. When we were buying tickets, Matt stopped making those sounds. But then, when we took our seats, he started burping again. The passengers began to turn around, and someone even made a remark. But Matt just grinned back. The longer the ride was, the louder the disgruntled passengers were. Even the driver began to glance at us unpleasantly, but Matt didn't seem to care. I poked Matt in the ribs a couple of times, trying to shut him up, but that made him burp more. With a story with a guard in mind, I tried to pretend that I wasn't with Matt and that I was a victim like everyone else on the bus, but the passengers weren't convinced. Soon, they started reproaching me, telling me to shut my boyfriend up. And when a woman even yelled at me, Matt unexpectedly and rudely shut her up, ordering her not to speak to his girlfriend in that tone. The woman said that he was not the one to be talking to her about manners. After discussing for so long, the driver stopped the bus an hour's walk from the nearest stop and told all the dissatisfied passengers to get off there. Of course, everyone considered us to be the dissatisfied passengers. I didn't know what to do. It was disgusting to be with Matt, but without him, I wouldn't have ever reached the town. Matt, as if he was not a bit upset, offered to go hitchhiking. He stood by the curb and boldly raised his hand. We caught the first car quickly, but Matt burped a couple of times, and the driver asked us to get out, being afraid that next, Matt would be vomiting in the car. In order not to waste time, we continued the rest of the way on foot. Sometimes Matt would burp again, and every time I didn't know whether I should get angry or burst out laughing. What would you do if you were me? Despite all his disadvantages, Matt was a pretty nice guy. He noticed that I was tired of the long walk, and when we got to the nearest gas station, he offered to take a break and even laid his jacket on the border so that I could sit down and not get my dress dirty. He left me to go and do something. I didn't want to think about that as he had already done enough nasty things before. I texted Ellie a couple of messages saying that I was on my way with a boyfriend and I'd probably be late but definitely will come. And I thought the situation started to get funny as it turned into a surprise for my friend. Cheered up, I went to look for Matt. Suddenly, I heard his voice. He was standing around the corner. I heard that Matt was talking to someone on the phone. I only heard, "Yeah, she's with me." And literally a second later, Matt hid his phone in a pocket and came towards me. He had a bag of chips with him. So cute. He bought me a snack. But who was he talking to? And about whom? Was that conversation about me? I felt uncomfortable, and that nice guy Matt began to seem suspicious, as if he had come straight from a thriller. What if he deliberately prevented me from getting to the city? Who knew what was in that bag of chips? I asked him if he wanted to split the snack with me, and Matt said he couldn't. On the train, he ate the whole bag of chips. So, I threw away the gift just in case. Fortunately, Matt quickly found a man who was prepared to give us a lift to the city. The old man was very kind, and most importantly, he was almost deaf and didn't even hear Matt's burping, which continued as soon as we sat in the car. And then, having gone through the hell of the countryside highways, we returned to civilization. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation at the gas station. I thought about trying to throw Matt off on my way, but he stuck to me and even found the road to Ellie's place faster than I figured it out on the city transport map. Nervously, I asked if he had any other plans for the evening, and he confidently replied that he cleared his entire schedule specifically to be my boyfriend today. Well, why not take him with me? If he really was some kind of maniac, I'd better find it out around my friends who would be ready to protect me. But when we entered my friend's house, I stopped being afraid that Matt would drag me into an alley and kill me, and I began to fear that he would burp in front of everyone. And it happened. Matt opened his mouth wide like a whale and made such a strong and disgusting sound that all the guests turned to us. I was ready to sink into the ground or escape back onto the highway or anything. And then Ellie came up to us and loudly slapped Matt on his shoulder. "Your pancreas again, goof?" she asked almost gently. And Matt embarrassedly scratched the back of his head and said, "Yes, I ate a bag of chips before the trip." I froze with an open mouth, and Ellie, laughing, explained that Matt was her cousin, and when she found out that we were going to be on the same train, she deliberately asked him to look after me and maybe to get acquainted so that I wouldn't be embarrassed to show up without a boyfriend. I was about to feel offended, but I remembered that I myself was about to involve my cousin in this, so I said, "Okay." And Matt, chuckling, added that I had an angelic patience and he thought that his burping that suddenly attacked him would scare me away. I replied, What girl would leave a guy just because of a couple of disgusting sounds? And then, we went to dance. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm 19 years old, and I just hate sitting at home. Do you like to travel? To a neighboring city or maybe to other countries? To the jungle or the desert? I just love it. But I didn't know what kind of danger extreme tourism hides. Watch this video to the end and find out how my love for tourism drove me crazy. I used to stay at home all the time. My parents worked all year round and they didn't have time to take me on vacation. But as soon as I came of age, the world opened all the borders for me. I've been everywhere. China, India, England, Russia, France, Africa. I can't list all of them at once. And of course, I shared photos and stories on my social networks. Well, who doesn't? I tried to explain to people why they should take a break from their work and see the world. I said, hey, stop sitting at home. But people didn't believe me. You can't just go on a trip around the world. However, there were also those who shared my interests. So be it. I'll tell you a secret. I didn't make my own travel plans. And why? There are professionals for this. But still, I had one obligatory item: to try the local cuisine. But it was always difficult for stay-at-home people to understand us travelers. The extreme tourists didn't like us very much. They kept laughing at us and recording offensive messages. Have you ever met people who think they are the only true fans and despise the rest? They'd been making my life hell. But one day, one of them, a guy named Zach, challenged me to pass the ancestral road in one of the national parks of North America. Don't get me wrong, I could have refused, but he promised to give me the honorary title of a member of the travel club, of which he was conveniently a vice president. When you are a member of the club, no one has the right to encroach on your status as a traveler. Anyway, not a bad answer to haters, and an excuse to meet Zach in person. The internet suggested that the ancestral road was just a path of several kilometers, which boys went to become men. I don't know how it used to be, but it doesn't take that long these days, so I accepted the challenge. Unfortunately, none of my tour operators were able to travel along the ancestral road. So I had to buy a ticket to the national park Zach was talking about and try to find guides from a local travel agency. However, this travel agency had never heard of any ancestral road. But this was the national park Zach had been talking about. I was about to film the exposure of the cheater Zach when suddenly a man came up to me. He asked me, "Are you looking for the ancestral road?" This man immediately seemed very suspicious to me, but he said that he would only take payment after the trip, and I agreed. We went on the road on a quad bike. I insisted on it. We had been driving for a couple of hours when my guide stopped abruptly. He came up to me and said bluntly, "The two of us will not go further. There is not enough fuel. We will have to walk." I reasoned that we had spent a little more than half to get here together, which meant that one of us would need a little less fuel to get back alone. The guide did not agree, but I demanded, "Go back for fuel. I will wait for you here and then come back and finish the trip. I won't walk." The guide tried to persuade me to finish the trip on foot, or refuse, or drive back together. But I took his pleas on camera and threatened to post it online and leave him without payment. The guide spat, ordered me to stay where I was, and drove off. All alone, in the middle of the woods. Yeah. I took out my smartphone. There was no connection. I could only wait. And then, suddenly, I realized that someone was there. I cringed and held my breath as I remembered Zach's advice in one of the videos and prepared for the worst. Suddenly, a little squirrel jumped out of the bushes into the clearing. I relaxed, but in vain. The squirrel rushed to attack. Have you ever realized that you are in the wrong place? I definitely did not belong in the forest, in a battle with a maniac squirrel. It started lunging at me, biting my ankles above my shoes. I panicked, tried to fight back, but soon lost my composure and ran in fear. This monster chased me until I threw a bag of nuts at it with all my strength. And then I realized that the earth was slipping away from under my feet. I fell down, hit my head, and passed out. I came to my senses when I felt heavy drops fall on my face. Drip, drip, drip. And how come only for a minute the clear sky was covered with dark clouds? Or not a minute has passed? And then I heard a voice say, "Get up, we must find shelter, quickly." I climbed out of the hole, and the voice said to me, "Go to that tree and hide in the roots, quickly." I did as the voice said, and then I shouted, "Where are you?" And then I heard the answer, "In your pocket." I pulled out my phone and suddenly saw Zach. He looked at me with his trademark reassuring smile. I burst into tears of happiness. I passed out several times during the night, but Zach woke me up in the morning and told me to get ready for the road. Zach told me where to go, and I followed. I had given my nuts to the squirrel, but Zach told me which berries I could eat and which I couldn't. I was still in pain, but Zach demanded, "Go! Step by step, kilometer by kilometer." Zach taught me how to make fire by friction, and to find and make drinking water, and how to roast acorns properly. A few days later, I came to the river. I was so tired that I couldn't move. Zach begged me to keep going, not to give up, and I found the strength to walk again. I walked, fell, rose, and went on. At the bridge, I turned right and immediately ran into the patrol of hunters. I came to myself in the hospital with severe exhaustion, concussion, and a sprained ankle. It turned out that I spent 9 days in the forest. I asked for my smartphone, but it was smashed to pieces. Zach left me. And as it turned out, not for long. Zach came into the room. The real one, in the flesh. It turned out that he had made up a story about the ancestral path, and then disguised himself as a guide. He just wanted to show me what real tourism meant, with all the romance of the forest and survival, but he didn't expect me to be so adamant. When Zach realized that it wouldn't work, he gave in to my persuasions and left, but when he came back, he didn't find me where he left me. All this time, Zach was looking for me, burning with guilt. And I survived with his advice, as if he were there for me. But I've already made up my mind. We'll go camping with Zach, and I'll become a full member of the travel club. But first, I'll just take a rest in a more familiar way. Have you had any cases when your mind went beyond the boundaries of normal? Tell us about them. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so that you don't miss new stories.